Martin Popoff from the Contrarians here. Welcome back to another special edition. I mean, this is basically a review of a new album. We don't do a lot of that here, but as a person with a sad life who thinks way too much about music, talks way too much about music, people are asking me what I think of the new Roger Waters album, The Dark Side of the Moon Redux. Also, of course, I recently did this book, which is a big book on the dark side of the moon. Comes in a nice slipcover like this. So that's the other reason people are asking me about this, I start answering back. It's usually people are asking me in email or Facebook or whatever. And like one of my standard lines with this stuff is, and it's so true. It's like, if I type too little, you're ticked off. If I type too much, I'm ticked off. So this is a nice way to cover off that sort of thing. So I just get to talk about it, sort of thing. So yeah, Roger Waters, The Dark Side of the Moon Redux came out October 6th, 2023. And basically, I mean, you could go on YouTube and see his motivations for doing this thing. It's fascinating. You think about, people have cited semi-conspiracy theories that, he's doing this to erase the legacy of David Gilmour and all this stuff. And you listen to him talk about it. He mentions David and the rest of the band. And he says, this is a reimagining. This is to continue the work of that album. He says, what does he say? Something like people are not really breathing in the air of the message of that album. And this is to add to the message of that album and just to extend it. And it's also, it's the 50th anniversary, as this thing says. It says 50 years right on front of it. Yeah, I can never remember the title of my own book. They gave it a pretty simple title, sort of thing. But to celebrate the 50 years of this album, he says, we've all lived with it all these years. We all know it so well, sort of thing. And so it was to give a little bit of a twist on it. The other thing I feel about this album, a couple things about it, and we'll go into the songs a little bit, but to me, it's a bit of a combination of, I'm embarrassed to say this sometimes, but talking about an album you play way too much to the expense of other albums not getting played very much. So Is This the Life We Really Want is probably my most played album of the 2000s. I just play this way too many times. Tied with this one, Clutch, Blast Tyrant. I would say these are my two albums, in the last 20 years that I've played more than any other album that you can imagine. But I feel like this album is so. First of all, it's there's a large feeling with it that's it's a reflection on the things Roger has learned through his life, but it's also a reflection of an old man and a reflection of death, sort of thing. And that's what I feel one of my favorite of the many messages on this album is. So to me, it's a continuation. Well, it's a continuation of a few things. It's a continuation of The Dark Side of the Moon. It's a continuation of what did he call the thing? The sessions, when he did Mother, and he did the short little version of the lockdown sessions. That's what it was called. The continuation of that concept where he took some old songs. I mean, go look at that Mother video on YouTube. It's unbelievable. So it's a continuation of the idea of him reimagining and redoing these old songs. I think it's a continuation of this album. And I think it's a continuation of Nick Mason's Saucerful of Secrets. In the musical, in the beautiful sort of nuanced way that Nick Mason's very capable band pulls off doing all of those early years Pink Floyd songs and reimagines them and brings them into high fidelity and to something that is all about performance, but very, very simple, nuanced, layered, gorgeously arranged performance. So I think you're getting that here as well. So I feel the inspiration of Nick's band on this album as well. But yeah, so what can I say about this? Let's see. This is a quote here. The new recording is more reflective, I think, more indicative of what the concept of the record was. It's a reinterpretation, and I hope we can gain more from it than we did back in 1973 when it first came out, because it's been part of all our lives for 50 years, and yet we are still not breathing in the air. There's the exact quote. So yeah, here's a funny thing. It's like, I mean, we might even name this episode this or something to do with this, but I hope this doesn't ruin the album for you. So the funny thing about this record that kind of really bothers me, is when I was telling my good buddy Ralph Chapman how much I'm just so absolutely hypnotized by this album. he says, yeah, it's really good, but the drumming, what is with that drumming, right? There's this really sort of dry, stark, shocking demo quality snare drum sound, right? And the drums are really simple on it. So this is Joey Waronker, right? And so the drumming's really simple on this. Is this the life we really want? And then given that snare sound, it's used for grace notes all the time, and it's a really sort of ugly sounding snare sound, and there's no nuance to it. It's very clunky. And so the drums on here are almost played as a sort of strange demo quality timekeeping feel, right? On that album, and that carries forward onto this, The Dark Side of the Moon Redux. The drums are very odd on it, right? It's so I did an episode of my audio podcast, A History in 5 Songs with Martin Popoff. You can't unsee that, and this is something. It was my first example that I used of my 5 examples of something I couldn't unsee. Soon as a very smart, good friend of mine, Ralph Chapman, said that to me, it's like, now I can't unhear that, right? On that album, that there's a weird demo quality to one little part of the performance, right? So that is here as well, and I can't unhear that on this album. Although, so I don't want to ruin it for you that way, because I love this album. I think it's beautifully done what he's done with it. And like I say, the rest of the performances, I mean, I would say the theme here is the organ work, the synthesizer and organ work. So we've got Johnny Shepherd. There's a Hammond. There's a big sort of Hammond's, not big Hammond sound. It's because everything is subtle on it, but there's a pervasive Hammond sound on it. And there's also this really cool cello work throughout the whole thing as well. You definitely hear the Gus Seifert cello stuff on here, and you hear that throughout. It's almost one of the most conversational, chattery instruments to go along with the main instrument. I gotta say, I mean, one of the main instruments is that snare drum. But cello is a main instrument, and then Roger Waters provides 2 main instruments, which is his spoken word stuff and his singing. So basically the theme of this record is that it is this new, very nuanced, beautifully recorded, beautifully arranged, cocktail jazz quiet version of The Dark Side of the Moon. And people say the lack of guitar solos on it is a direct affront to David Gilmour. But putting that aside, this is the music that we're getting throughout this thing. Very clever. So that's the music. And so what happens with the vocals on here is that it's basically Roger Waters drifting in and out of the original lyrics, and going on tangents sometimes. Sometimes those tangents are short. Sometimes they're really long, like the story about Dawn in Great Gig in the Sky, right? So that's obviously an instrumental of sorts, where Claire Torrey's voice is used as an instrument in that song, but it's an instrumental, right? And even in Any Color You Like, which is an instrumental on the original. So the funny thing there is that Roger provides sort of like a fragmented poem thing to that one. So sometimes he's in storytelling mode, as in Great Gig in the Sky, and sometimes he's more poetic, and sometimes he's just putting in little bits of words. But I think what you really get. So let's just look at the so band member wise, yeah, we've got Jonathan Wilson is in there as well, in common. I kind of made a little note about who's in common with this album, because I really feel that well, no, I wouldn't say, other than that really odd drum performance, I wouldn't say that this is not nearly as plush as The Dark Side of the Moon Redux. But yeah, we've got in common Jonathan Wilson, Gus Seifert, Joey Waronker, Roger. And so yeah, just to move through it a little bit. So I think what you get as the actual sort of raison d'etre of this thing in a big way is the way that Speak to Me gets basically what he foists upon Speak to Me is the lyrics of Free For from Obscured by Clouds. But the key line there is, the memories of a man in his old age are the deeds of a man in his prime. So this is a man in his old age redoing a deed from his prime, but he's reflecting back on his life, not so much Dark Side of the Moon. He saves the reflection of Dark Side of the Moon for literally using the lyrics of Dark Side of the Moon, which he uses throughout. But the reflections of a man in his old age really seem to be in here. So that really frames what's going on here. And what's interesting, so you get that, and then when you get to Breathe, the lyrics are free four, so you get kind of a stanza to kick that off. So it bleeds into Breathe, and then we basically get his voice. We get him singing, and like I said, we get him singing, we get him speaking sort of throughout this album. But and his vocals are mixed really up front. They're really growly. They sound like his face, right? And it's so front and center, so that when he's speaking, it fills up the room, sort of thing, and that music sort of recedes. What else did we have here? So yeah, I'm just looking at my notes. Breathe, yeah, so very sparse. There's the gorgeous Hammond organ sound. When we get to On the Run, he recounts a dream, and this is a large volume of lyrics. There's lots going on here. So he recounts this dream. And it's got the brakes in the car thing, which is always funny. That's in a lot of people's dreams, that the hands are big, sort of thing. So he goes through this whole thing for On the Run. So he's basically adding some interest to this thing that's basically a sound collage on the original. We get to Time. He's this again is one where I really feel it really reminded me of Saucerful of Secrets. We get a stanza of spoken word again, and then the song the same way we get into Breathe. Again, these excellent swooping sort of cello lines throughout that are almost like conversational. They almost feel like a second voice or a third voice, because I think there's two Roger voices on this album, sort of thing. We've talked about Great Gig in the Sky. Money was the first thing we heard from this as an advance, and I think it rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, because I think it's the worst thing on here. The whole melody to Money and the arrangement of it is a little repetition, and it could be a little bothersome. I think it's in 7/4, right? But here it's like, so I guess the interesting thing is when you make a cocktail version of a song that is the loudest song on the original, something falls flat on it. So it's slower and quieter, and it's longer. There's a big section where he does infuse this sort of boxing style story in it. Us and Them, again, a semi-sung, semi-spoken sort of thing here. This reminds me of when he, in the video, he says something like, yeah, you all know the bloody songs. This is Dark Side of the Moon sort of thing. It's kind of cool. Any Color You Like, spoken word, more of that excellent sort of memorable cello work that you get in here as well. And again, with those drums, like I say, this was an instrumental. Now it's kind of like a funky jam with mumbling in it, right? But yeah, I love it. I think it's a really good job done with it. Brain Damage, kind of funny. He starts with so the official line is why don't we re-record Dark Side of the Moon, but it's more like, why don't we record it? He starts laughing and he mumbles it out, sort of thing, and then it says he's gone mad, kind of thing. So that's a nice parallel with the original Dark Side of the Moon. But yeah, he really sings this one, which makes sense, of course. Again, with the soft textures kind of thing. Eclipse, we've got a beautiful vocal arrangement here where he is doing a spoken part, and then there is this real singing mixed in with it. So a little more ambition on the vocal part. And then you've got the Everything Under the Sun is in tune, but the sun is eclipsed by the moon. And then you get the heartbeat thing. And then at the end, it's I'll tell you one thing, Jerry, me old mucker, it's not all dark, is it? So that's a variant on the original Dark Side of the Moon thing. So he's putting in his little whimsical, quizzical little bits of humor to this thing. It's not a very political album. Like I say, it's more, the long story about Dawn is all about him having cancer and him and Roger writing him a letter and all this. And, the Free Four is just this devastating song about getting old, right? So that really feels a big part of it. Rogers kept it vague about what he's going into, in terms of what the original message is and what it is at this point. But again, I think the message really bleeds into is this the life we really want? Boy, I hate that album cover, and I have to look at this every single time to get those words in order, right? It really bothers me when you've got album titles that are hard to memorize, right? but yeah, so that's sort of the situation. I think it's pretty cool that this exists. I don't think, there's no way it's going to supplant, and just like Roger says, it's not going to supplant the original album. It's just a new extra interesting thing, which again leads on from the lockdown sessions. I'm glad it exists. I want to hear Roger tell these stories and add these lyrics. I love his voice, whether he's singing or whether he's speaking, sort of thing, because I adore that album so much, and Amused to Death is an absolute masterpiece as well, right? But I would rather, I guess I would rather hear a follow up to that album, because it's old now, right? We're going back to, what is this, 2015 at this, 2017 at this point, right? So we're 6 years on past this album. So, I would have rather that the effort was put into a new follow up of new songs. But this is, this is the best part of new songs being put into old songs, which to me is lyrics. Lyrics are super important to me. So he's got the lyrics and the singing and the arrangements. I mean, this is just a masterclass in subtle arranging of many layers, and you barely hear it, including the sound effect stuff. So the sound effect stuff is in here, but again, even that stripped back or put further back in the mix, sort of thing. So there you go. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Yeah, it's funny. I'm ambivalent about this thing coming. I've seen so many scathing reviews of it, and of course, a lot of that has to do with Roger being in the news for the whole, the whole now with the whole war being the way it is. Roger's almost kind of having a little bit of a moment where, so he didn't come out and say much about it, right? And people, if you think of what he has been saying or the debate about Roger lately, for a minute at least right now, his views seem to be more or less in the mainstream of the mainstream media views about what's going on. So you don't see a lot of criticism of Roger right now. But then, yeah, in a weird, timely way, this album comes out, and people are really debating Roger in this sense. And then back to the whole, all the dramas about Pink Floyd sort of thing. So yeah, pretty interesting. I guess the final thing I'll say about this in an abstract way is that it's almost a new category of art that he's made, right? This whole idea where you really kind of change something up. Nobody's really ever changed something up in exactly this way, right? You can hear people redo old songs or do covers of whole albums where they're essentially giving you kind of a whole new musical version of the album, but the lyrics are always the same, right? So this is an interesting kind of new art category, I guess, as I said. So kind of interesting. So there you go. Let us know what you think in the comments below. But that is my review of the Dark Side of the Moon Redux. Thanks again.